about. There's something evolving. Whatever may come, the world keeps revolving. They say the next big thing is here, that the revolution's near. But to me it seems quite clear that it's all just a little bit of history repeating. The newspapers shout, a new style is growing, but it don't know if it's coming or going. There is fashion, there is fat, some is good, some is bad, and the joke is rather sad, that it's all just a little bit of history repeating. And I've seen it before. If they don't know who's singing, why off your head, it's your hips that are swinging. Life's for us to enjoy. Woman, man, girl and boy, feel the pain, feel the joy, and sidestep the little bits of history repeating.
Lotus just called me early and I was getting my groove on before I started the show. Okay, I haven't done my introduction yet. It is April 7th, 2018. Welcome everybody to the Porthole to Justice. I am your host, Amelia Duran, and my guest is Ms. Lotus Justice for Live Lunch with Lotus. Hi, Miss Lotus.
Hello, how are you doing, my friend? How are you today?
I am so wonderful. I look forward to our date.
Right? Well, most people don't realize that we talk when we're not like live, so they probably just,
Well, and most people probably don't realize that before I sit down to have a long conversation on the show, I dance in my living room.
Right? You're like vibing off Ellen DeGeneres in that respect. I think people should dance before they do great things and after great things all the time.
Yeah.
I'm a real big proponent of a victory dance.
Mm-hmm.
When you achieve small things in life, it really is helpful. You get so few times that you actually get to feel victorious in things that you do anymore. I definitely suggest when people feel a sense of victory that they take a little, thank self.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, you know,
it's a difficult world out there.
It is. It's such a harsh world, and there's so much going on, and it does feel, I want to say it does feel kind of good, because with the social media news network taking off the way that it has, and so many people are connecting, even, right, you know, that wouldn't necessarily be like-minded, and we have a lot of different point of views that we present. And it feels good. It feels like, you know, it's been a long road. We've been doing this for a while.
I think that any organization that's able to voice some sense of truth outside of what is clearly a very contrived and controlled public, quote, media, with the old prevailing news networks and stuff like that. I mean, they call it, and this is just something I say to everyone, they called it programming from the day they created it. It was called programming. Mm-hmm. And go watch your TV program. And, you know, it's really funny how people just kind of don't see the clear writing on the wall. And even things like that your television is a form of programming produced by the state, or the state being the powers that be. And the beauty of the internet is that it has afforded an alternative means for people to interact and communicate that is outside of the controls, predominantly, mm-hmm, as now, of the authoritarian states of men and women. So I don't think that they anticipated that being what it was used for, or expanding to. And I tell people all the time, if we had the internet during the moon landing or during the assassination of Kennedy, we would not have the same perspectives about those events in history that we do now, that need to be corrected in a lot of ways. I mean, that the whitewashing and the lies that were perpetuated by the very controlled and contrived propaganda machines at the time, that were being orchestrated by the states of men, completely, created what our perceptions were versus what the reality of things are.
I'm sorry for coughing.
It happens. You talk on the radio so much. It's not unusual for that to happen. And you know me, I already have my issues with continually people trying to kill me by ripping my head off. That I already have issues with my voice and paralysis of my vocal cords and stuff, and swallow complexes. I don't even if people don't understand that, then they don't know me. So I give you that. If you cough, I'm not going to get upset. I mean, our vocal, like I've been healing from. We're being attacked.
Yeah, we're being attacked spiritually. Yeah. We're being attacked physically. Recently, Lotus had an incident with her voice. She went to the Nancy Schaefer event in Georgia.
Yes, I was invited to be a guest speaker there.
She was a guest speaker. And her live was censored from Facebook by one of the camera people there.
Well, he definitely shut it off. And I mean, let me just go ahead. You can, and I'll speak to the nature of that. I mean, it's a spiritual war, and people who don't understand that we are in a spiritual war. And
I do. There is that spirit of there is a very strong spirit of. There is a group in the movement of men that have an issue they blanket that it's all women, but people, there's bad and good people. It's not a sex or gender thing. There is but if you adopt this mentality of misogyny, you're aligning yourself with some of the dysfunction currently in our society.
Well, and I just spoke with a good friend. I would say it's Facebook. We speak regularly, and he's one of the good guys. He's a very centered spiritual man in his heart. He's straight. He's married, has children, and he's not from this country. He's a foreigner, and he understands. The word misogyny, unfortunately, is come to mean people who war against women and children, and who oppress the very most disgusting, reprobate aspects of the masculine traits in their extreme forms, their warring habits and stuff. And unfortunately for people like him, they really give men a bad name. Same way with women who are separatists who run around, lambasting all men. Any group, any group of men who lambaste women on the whole, or vice versa, women who lambaste men in general on the whole, should be shunned. That's not what we're supposed to be doing with each other. And same way with someone who lambastes an entire everyone who's black, who's white, it's anybody who sits in judgment of entire groups of people in the mask of something that they're the opposite of. Really should be shunned. That's reprobate mentality. It's very spiritless, and it does not benefit anybody. And so, to me, those types of individuals are very divisive in nature, and that's why they should be shunned. Same way with people who are not. Who are spiritually vacant in that this is the aspect of understanding we are in a spiritual war, and why people like you and I get literally, I think punch me in the throat or grab me.
I thought about this a lot, Lotus, and I prayed on this and I meditated on it. And it happens with the women too. They have one really bad experience, and all right. Men are bad. And the men tend to do this too. Women, and so if you don't have God and you don't have the spirit of discernment, you're going to operate and fester fear. You're going to
absolutely and hatred and blithe and ire and all those really negative influences that poison the sacred heart of men and women, and in our righteous nature. In the situation that happened to me on that weekend. After I was cut off purportedly because there was a Facebook limit to the feed, and which was odd because I didn't know at the time that it was also live on YouTube. So it had kind of already been shut off on Facebook at the time when I was shut off. So I thought that was odd in hindsight. And then we had some issues with some behavior with some people there, particularly one young man who. Really just is lacking in spiritual guidance. And I don't know how to explain to people, except we basically live in like the Matrix, where if you are not spiritually sound and you don't have your spirit right, you are going to be subject to be used as a tool and a shill and a device of infiltrate to undermine, the restoration of righteous law, the law of God upon men, and I mean the good kind, the caring, loving, nurturing, do no harm to others, protect innocence. That God, not the beat babies' heads against the wall, war, oppress, rape, pillage. Not that heretical God that has been put forth for us by those who profess to speak for the one true God. So, if you're not spiritually aligned, and you have someone like me walk into a room,
you're going to trigger some people.
Right, and it's going to trigger the reprobate spirit side of things, and you're going to be used. And so I have to be very conscientious. I do know that I probably won't travel anymore without a security detail anymore, because it's coming to the point where every time I go and do something like this, that I am, personally attacked, and or in certain circumstances becoming physically attacked by these spiritually vacant people. And that's not a judgment on this young man. I was feloniously assaulted that evening.
You were throat punched.
I was throat punched. Yes, I was
and even punched. If this was a gesture, like in joking or jest.
No, it wasn't. No, there were some fighting words, as one of the victims said, as one of the witnesses said beforehand. Well, those were fighting words, she said. And he was in our, and there was liquor involved, which they call it spirits for a reason, folks. When you become inebriated with liquor and alcohol, the spirits flow through you, and so it's kind of a lesson in how even if he's a good man when he's sober, he becomes subject to being taken over by spirituous things, and because he's not morally righteous, he's not centered his heart in his spirit, and so he was prone,
my friend Robin would say he's not centered in his heart chakra.
Absolutely, he has got. And we discussed this earlier in the evening. I said, we should realize we're in a spiritual war. And he says, "Well, I'm a liberal. I'm like, well, you're a danger then, dude." Okay, I would say that I would use this incident as a testimony to one, the spiritual nature of the war we are in, because I don't think this young man, when he's sober, is like this, or maybe he is. But the spirituous nature of things bring forth, the most reprobate aspects of self in some people. And, I was feloniously assaulted, but I would never, having been subjected to that side of their, quote, law, I could have had him arrested. It would have been immediate felony probably in the state we were in. In most states, usually when you throat punch people or choke people, it's an automatic felony. But and it's always interesting to me why I always get attacked in my throat. This is like the fifth. I've had people try to literally internally decapitate me by ripping my head off. I've been attacked before by 3 men. This is not the first time I've been physically attacked for speaking truth, particularly in defense of women. It's amazing how if you walk around not tolerating the repugnant statements of people and or the behaviors of people as they are oppressed upon women in general, usually in a very bigoted way, you'd be surprised how often men will punch you, jump on you, and try to beat you up. Literally, it's quite amazing. And that's been something that I'm doing my whole life is not allowing men to be repugnant in public and make disgusting statements towards women in groups and stuff like that. And then as a result of that, be physically attacked and jumped and had my head tried to be ripped off, which resulted in permanent loss of swallow function, permanent paralysis in my throat. So, I'm not. It's not a foreign concept to me to defend the woe and to be beat upon and oppressed by a misogynistic construct of men who just don't even understand that they have this deep-rooted hatred towards women. And it's amazing to me how many men actually have a deep-rooted hatred towards women that don't even know they do until you start pushing them on the issue.
They're not doing the work. They're not doing the work to heal, because they're not even aware.
And the same goes for women. And the same goes for women. It's amazing how many women don't understand how they have a deep-rooted hatred towards men. And that whole aspect of the destruction between the yin and the yang, the cooperative nature between the yin and the yang. You can call it male, female, I don't care. For me, it more in the Hindu and Buddhist sense of the yin and the yang, the husbandry versus the wifery, the cultivators of the protection of the child in woe, and then the keepers of the house, the internal.
This is an issue that we have societally and culturally. The men are not stepping up to husbands. Society. And they're abandoning their post as far as family and women go, and the few men that are standing up, they're
being beat down too. And even those that this is an interesting ingrained thing. This is one thing I learned on that weekend. There's a lot of men engaged and involved in this political movement where 95% of the people who are victimized are women. And I find that to be unusual. I think that's kind of a problem in my mind. And I ponder, how is this to be? And I'm thinking, well, if the men that are in the forefront of this come to this thinking that their issues are, well, I haven't seen my kids because my ex-girlfriend, this or that. Instead of pointing the finger at the authoritarian state and the coup and the crimes against humanity and the frauds upon the United States corporation and the funds of title, instead of pointing to the direct culprit of the oppressions, these men hold a deep-seated hatred for one particular woman and don't resolve those things, and then it comes out and is affected upon other women who have already been victimized. And so those women, the victims of the thieving and the kidnapping of our children and the war upon woman and child that has been prevalent for thousands of years, those women are not going to hang around men like that. And so if the men that come to these movements are holding deep-rooted hatred towards women, they're going to, because of their own personal reasons, and I'm not saying they're not justified, that they have a particular issue with one woman, and this happens a lot when you lack in critical thinking, logic, and reason, where you run around reacting to the world in particular circumstances where one person treats you a certain way, and you apply it to everyone you see of that character and status. I mean, that's really a person who's void of critical thinking. And void of a spirit is heart, who gets their shit together, so to speak. And so I am very astounded by the fact that there are very few women who are representative, and we've talked about that, of what is predominantly an issue that is being oppressed against women and children. And so and I find it that the men who are husbanding this political movement, so to speak, are not necessarily understanding that there is a problem within the circumstances that men are trying to control something. Again, that is predominantly a female issue, an issue that's being oppressed upon the mother. I'm not saying men aren't being oppressed by what's happening. I'm just saying that women are disproportionately victimized by the circumstances. And yes, men are being kept from their children and this, that, and the other thing, and men are being denied this and that. But basically, they've just been getting what they wanted. It's
a general war that is intended to...
Right, exactly. And what's really happening with these men is instead of them realizing...
They attack men, but they do it in a different way. They attack the women, and they do that in a different way. But they also try to divide and conquer by race,
right.
ethnicity.
So what happens with the men... What happens with the men is these are men that are in agreement with the preponderance of the men that have been pushing these agendas. The preponderance of the men warring against women are rooted. There was a book that was written around the time of our revolution, and I could get the specific citation for you, but it was a book written about the exposing of the undermining and the infiltration of the Masonic unions, the freemen societies, by these reprobate men who wanted to use the secrecy of the unions to be able to have sex with women on a regular basis, use alchemy to get them to have abortions, literally to basically behave in the most disgusting, reprobate, misogynistic pattern possible, and to use their infiltration of the Masonic orders to facilitate and kind of create a state that allowed them to behave in repugnant fashions with no retaliations from society. So the agenda of the prevailing states of men, just men, not women, in the past, have been for the purposes of allowing men to just behave badly. And so good men are now reaping the rewards of they want to have something to do with their children and their wife, and the bad men have made it so they don't have to, because that's been the goal, is to make it so that men can do what they want. They can incessantly war, rape, mayhem, and do all these repugnant things, which are in contradistinction to the safety and security of the family unit. They now are finding themselves victims to a prevailing state that has absolved itself of all the repugnant behavior and said, we're going to put it all on the woman, and we're going to let men run around the world and rape, mayhem, war, and do what they want. We're going to put this under the guise and auspices of states of men and say it's okay. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not okay if you do it as one man versus a group of men. Raping, mayheming, and warring upon a society is wrong, period. I don't care if you want to call it the Army of the United States or the Army of, I don't care, Russia. Just because men get together and from a group of men who are like-minded in their reprobate mentality does not make what they do righteous. And it's unfortunate, because then you have the righteous individual man who now want to have the rights to their children, but the way the paradigm is structured, the men have wanted to be able to push their responsibilities away. And so you're seeing a pushback from the righteous men. And instead of looking at the groups and states of men that have put them in this predicament, who have been victimizing women and oppressing war and stuff upon the woman and child for generations, thousands of years, instead of pointing to their states of men that have brought them to this vacancy in what their rights are, they want a war. They want to continue to perpetuate the war upon the woman.
I really see some really good God-fearing men wanting to step out.
Absolutely.
Wanting to step out, but then they're being targeted, and then they're having to act out in fear or fostering a fear. Yep. And it's like this really bad cycle. And
it is a bad cycle, and that's why I really promote and love all the men that I know personally that are exemplar of righteous, good-hearted men who have the sacred heart, or at least aligned. Their heart chakra is aligned with their feminine and male, sides, and understand, because men are oppressed too. I mean, anyone who knows me knows that I rail against male.
None of us are immune from the targeting.
No, I mean, but men are targeted just as much as women, just in a different way. Men are mutilated at birth. Their genital mutilation is tolerated in this world, which is repugnant. That should be immediately stopped. I think that's a disgusting. I don't even know how a society rationalizes the genital mutilation of anybody, child, female or male. I think the genital mutilation of children is a disgusting, reprobate behavior that is squarely unlawful. Mm-hmm. I don't care what religious constructs are. And for a society to tolerate the genital mutilation of boys, which which changes their brain conformation. It causes brain damage. They're starting to prove that this actually monarchs the child. And women going, well, men only think about their penises. Well, yeah, because when they were 2 weeks old, so much milk and flooded,
Exactly.
and it made a direct connection between their penis and the pain center, and it changed who they were. I mean, what do you expect? I mean, women allowing their children and fathers allowing their children to be mutilated. I mean, when men come to me and say, well, I didn't want my son to have an ugly penis. I'm like, so you're saying the way God made you is ugly? Like, that's programming right there. I mean, and it's for health concerns. Like, well, God, there must be a health reason why it's made the way it is that you're obfuscating, because God's not going to make something that is inherently bad for the nature of the instrument. So Goddess is not going to make a man's penis to be a certain way that it needs modified to be healthy. That's so antithetical to the constructs of the balance of nature. I mean, that right there tells you the person's had their mind altered to believe that God makes imperfect things.
Well, yeah,
God doesn't make anything imperfect.
It's a lot more impactful for men that come into this world simply because they're subjected to this.
Absolutely. I always give men grace in that, because they really are attacked more so physically from the time of their incarnation into this realm than women are. I mean, women are oppressed, on a standard whole with subjugation too. But, the concept of genital mutilation is again, a war upon the child, the sons of men. I mean, people don't understand that is a red dragon act to allow people to mutilate your son is spoken of in Revelation 11 as a war upon the sons of men. If you allow people to mutilate your sons, which changes their mind and triggers and changes who they would be and changes their character. And people say that it doesn't. That's ridiculous. You don't know the facts that relate to how the biology of the body responds. And I've seen this done. And when I was in med school, I watched it one time, and that really impacted me upon actually whether I wanted to be a doctor or not. I saw it done without anesthetic, the way they did it for years, where they pull the forceps. They literally they strap the child down, strap this infant down who's less than 2 weeks old.
I mean, I wasn't planning to get on this subject.
I know, but I'm just saying that if people understood the violence of that
and there
act.
was recently a story that I was considering profiling to the social media news network of a baby boy that he was subjected to this, and unfortunately he's bleeding to death, but it's just one of those subjects that's really hard to broach, but it is.
Well, it's hard to broach, but it's the reason to broach is to explain to men that they have been oppressed by states of men, that there are religions of men that are controlled by men who have perpetuated and promoted the mutilation of the male children, strictly for the purposes of indoctrination into a misogynistic cult.
Yeah.
And they themselves are victims of this, and they need. I mean. And fathers should protect their sons from that. And I understand the whole, what they've been indoctrinated to believe. That I don't want my son to feel ugly. And I mean, and that's another thing. We sit and think about the mind-body image of young females and feeling bad about body image. Young men are taught to hate their genitalia from the time they're born. I mean, these are ingrained societal issues that we need to talk about, because they are the core root of a lot of issues that we have, that have allowed the unseen hand of these hidden masters to undermine the spiritual nature of people, to undermine the cohesiveness, the spiritual cohesive, the personality of people spiritually. When you subject a child to extreme amounts of physical pain and torture, it changes them emotionally and spiritually inside. And it's so for people to think that they can. I mean, there are nice ways, to circumcise a young boy that are supposedly, not painful. But even still, they grow up thinking that how God made them was ugly and wrong, and that is a spiritual insult. That right there is the foundations for the misogynistic, Babylonian slave trade. The states of men know better than God. We're going to put a man as the vicar of Christ. It's this pushing aside the natural divinity of God and Goddess, and saying that the states of men and the doctors and the esquires and the kings and the popes and the vicars and the Caesars know better than your God. and have the right to judge you, not just God. That is the core root of the fascism and the mentality of these cults that now are grooming all of us to be their slaves, mentally and spiritually. So it is an important aspect that if you live in a society that allows the mutilation and or the spiritual or physical torture of children, period, I don't care how you bring it about, through the trafficking, the removal from their family, through violent genitalia mutilation, all these things where you have a society that is attacking the child, the spiritual and physical nature of a child as they come into this world, and denying them or depriving them of their natural state, that is a war upon the family, that is a war upon the woman and child, that is a war upon the culture and the civil society, and that is the point. You cannot have a state of men or women.
I think people are really starting to see the war on the family. I mean, I'm starting to feel a little bit of hope, Right.
I mean, and that's, I don't point out iniquities in people or spiritual failings in people for the purposes of doing anything but shunning from that behavior, because I'm not their judge. Same with this young man. I didn't call the cops on him. I didn't call a sheriff on him. I'm not going to. The social shunning shall do as it does. I'm not this young man's judge per se in that respect, nor would I allow other men, nor would I put him in the position where other men, which I know for a fact are reprobate in the quote judicial system, to take him and to make him their probate, their novitiate in their cult. He's already halfway there. Turning him over to that side would probably make him a worse man. I think it would be better to do the only thing that God allows us to do. Even though, I was physically damaged, and did have some side effects and some voice issues with that for a bit. I would not wish him to be subjected to what I was subjected to for a year in prison. I would not want him to have to be forced to go to the leper colony, because I don't know that it would help his spirit. I don't know.
And we don't touch on this very, very often, and since you brought it up, Can I interject and sort of change the flow of the conversation a little bit?
Absolutely.
You sort of consciously did a year in prison.
Absolutely. I chose it. I mean, it was a choice. I could have easily not been there. And that was actually repugnant from my mind from the get-go. If I just paid him a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
So basically, I was in prison falsely, against the law. I don't care what any attorney says; it was totally unlawful what happened. Mm-hmm. And I chose that path because, but I also pondered every step I took, that there were people who had no choice in the matter and were having this oppressed upon them against their will. Mm-hmm. And I could have allowed them to have jurisdiction over me, but I realized that that's like a double-edged sword, because the minute you do that, they can do whatever they want with you. They can traffic you, murder you. I mean, we speak of, that we're in the Lieber Code, and if you go on parole under the Lieber Code, if you ever are belligerent again, they can shoot you dead on sight without a trial. In my mind, this is why a lot of young people that we see in the news who are shot on sight by cops, they probably are on parole. And they can do that. If you're on parole, they can just shoot you dead on sight, and according to the Lieber Code. Mm-hmm. So, people need to be conscientious of the law in all that respect. So there was no way I was there. I knew that if I ever gave them authority over me in that respect and allowed them the personal jurisdiction, which I would never give them over me, because they are reprobate of spirit and law and everything, and they don't represent the law.
I want to talk about this. I want to talk about. I want to define. I want to talk about civil law, the civil
jurisdiction,
the Civil War,
right.
Right. And the definition of civil.
Well, I couldn't. Civil to me is a form of process that is not an American construct. Civil form, which is what we have civil, quote, courts, which are just really civil forums, FORUM, is a private form of law. It's a private jurisdiction of law that is controlled by the bar unions. Mm-hmm. And people are fraudulently misled into believing that they are the lawful judiciary as described under both constitutions, the de facto and de jure constitutions. And they aren't. They are merely, they actually are foreign agents that are under treaty to effect the bankruptcies against the United States, which your children have been leveraged as commodities to pay for. So your children have been made a blood debt instrument. And people don't understand, if they don't understand that concept that these are not courts of law as we know them and what they purport to be under the Constitution, and that they tell you every day you're growing up, and so they shove the Constitution in your face, and you just presume that the people that are governing you are that. That's not what they are. They are not that. They're not that at all. And so you're misled to believe one thing. So you willfully give yourself to this private jurisdictional forum, which the civil forum is a series of codes and procedures
layman language, when we think of the word civil, we think of being, a
polite.
civil debate.
Right.
We're being civil towards
that
each
it's
other.
polite. Right.
Yeah, but
well, I don't
actual
really notice
civil
anything
war,
polite.
the actual Civil War was a code of conduct that we defended, which became our common law.
Well, the Civil War was an argument over, I think, what was the form of law. Well, the Civil War is a false flag event, first off, because that's proven if you do the research, which I have, on the historical facts that led up to the Civil War, is there was gross embezzlement in our private bank and treasury by the people who ran it, which at that time would have been esquires, and who already were declared foreign to us by the Tone Amendment and the Treaty of Peace and Amity that came after that in the War of 1812. So, and in the 1840s, they literally, our private treasury and private bank, these are in the annals of Congress. These are not things I'm making up. You can find these facts. Like something like $20 million just disappeared, were embezzled out of the general fund of the public, of the private. At the time, we hired people to be our treasury, and we hired people to be our bank. And those private corporations, instruments of defrauded us and embezzled all this money, millions of dollars, and nothing happened. And they didn't prosecute, because the people who would prosecute were in coup to undermine the republic, right? So they didn't do anything, and so we're out $20 million, and we need $20 million. So then they create a public debt bank and treasury, and that's when the dividends, the fees, and so they sold stock to make up. They sold stock to the same people who conspired to steal our money. So they stole $20 million and then bought $20 million for the stock and put the debts they stole from us back onto the people. So the people were actually out kind of $40 million, which is a lot of money back then. And so the Civil War was an argument really on the southern states were like, we're not paying the dividends and if you read the Rebellion Acts, they basically were saying we're not paying the public debt that you're trying to put upon us for the frauds to our estates. They were actually the trusts of each republic state were held by the federal instrument, and that's what they stole. They stole the estate trusts of the states and of the Native American tribes, too, by the way. That's where the coup of the Native tribes were done as well, is in the 1840s. And then they took the Civil War era to undermine the electoral this is all in statutes. They undermined the electoral process. They created the Mayor's Court of D.C. By statute, the Supreme Court of the United States, which is now declared the head bankruptcy clearinghouse forum under the the Bankruptcy Act of 1898, Section 30.
All of this is constructively contradictory to what United States is symbolically
right.
stands
so
for.
They cooed our trading company. They cooed our trading company and stole. They embezzled millions of dollars from us, and then they oppressed the debts of the thefts back onto the state.
They market this one image of America, but the sad truth is that they are affecting these debtors' prisons. They are affecting oppression.
Your children are being conveyed as debt payments. I mean, that's the point. So you have this private judiciary, you have this judiciary, quote unquote, who are supposed to be, and they are Article 3 in the fact that they're created and affected through statute versus the common law de jure instruments of Article 1 courts. So Article 3 courts are now running everything. Well, they're under the grant of law of Article 3 courts, but they're not running America courts.
Yeah, I tagged you in a post. And I want to address this because I encouraged some of my followers to call the White House on behalf of this gentleman. There was a military officer recently that was sentenced to life in prison for protecting his family or his territory in his own home. He shot an intruder, and he's a Marine, and he's been sentenced to life in prison, Lotus. And I tagged you in the story in Social Media News Network because I'm outraged. I am gonna full on.
I get what you're saying, but that's what happens when you don't know the law. Because what happens whenever I spent a year in prison because we'll talk about jurisdiction. I refused. There's three
to a life. He's sentenced to, and
I'll explain to you how that happens.
Inalienable or unalienable rights.
He doesn't have them anymore. When he joined the military, he only has privileges and immunities. That's the point.
Oh, and that's another thing I want to say. People, do not waive your rights in the court of law. You need to say on the record, I do not waive my rights.
Okay. There's two types of rights, and we need to go back on this. So if you want to discuss this topic, you need to understand jurisdiction. First off, they're not courts of law. They're bankruptcy courts. They're Article 3 courts of statutes operating way outside of the law in de facto for the purposes of I guess, advancing an argument in law. Okay, but you have two types of rights. You have the substantial rights as the flesh and blood man, the instrument that you are given to you by your incarnation in the flesh. That's called, those are substantial rights. The 14th Amendment citizen is a thing, an instrument of trust. That only has privileges and immunities. When you join the military, okay, when you sign to be a military officer, and or when you become someone who accepts the title of nobility, or when you start to work for the state or the federal government, you waive your substantial rights. You lose your substantial rights, and you only garner at that time privileges and immunities. Well, privileges and immunities can be revoked. A privilege and an immunity is something granted to you by the state. So when he joined the military, he gave up his substantial rights. He wasn't told that. So that's the fraud. Because no one knows the truth of the matter in most things. Very few people. Like I said, even attorneys are lied to. Even attorneys are very confused on this. They are as much, if not more, subject to the frauds of the little unseen hand of the coup as anybody else, because they're being told all you have to do is this and you're good in the law, when in reality they're affecting sedition and treason on a regular basis and think they're not. That's the argument of, well, you must be reprobate of mind if you think you can, just because you wear a black robe, that you can dictate and take a child of God away from the mother that God gave them to and move them over here to your self-created state fiction of foster family. These are reprobate mindsets of people. No one has the lawful right to take a child given to a mother by God, unless that mother's trying to kill the baby. And even in that, there's some arguments in nature in that.
Regardless of the circumstances, though, regardless of the particular circumstances, the fact of the matter is, whenever you engage, whether it's in the courts or contractually, you never want to waive your rights. You want to always add in.
But here's the deal. Silence waives your rights. Silence waives your rights. So let's go back to jurisdiction. In order for anybody in law to have jurisdiction over you and to be your Elohim, they have to have, pursuant to the law, all forms, they have to have personal, venue, and subject matter jurisdiction. So venue they always have, even the fake courts, the forums, the private jurisdictional forums of the bar union, have venue jurisdiction because they've removed all other courts. They're the only court there operating as court. In fact, if you tried to say you're a court, they'd probably shoot you, okay? So they always have venue jurisdiction, and that's part of the monopoly. They've removed all other obstructions. They've removed all other competing constructs as far as who is a court in a particular venue, meaning the county, the city, the state, whatever, the venue, the region, the territory. Then they have subject matter jurisdiction because you're always being brought before them to discuss their statutes. These are statutes created by their bar union, okay? So you have the bar unions creating statutes, and then they're bringing you to their private jurisdictional forums, which are the only forums in the venue, to impose their statutes upon you. That's the monopoly right there. So they always have the presumption of subject matter and venue jurisdiction. So the key here is personal jurisdiction. Well, we're in a jural society, and you don't have jurisdiction over me unless I give it to you. Okay, it's supposed to be by willful consent. Okay, most people don't understand that there are trappings to that willful consent, and there are trappings within the statutes. If you are bankrupt and you show up as pauperous, you're in their jurisdiction because they're a bankruptcy firm. That's their job. So they're in charge of all bankrupts. Okay, you're there if you're a dead estate, which all dead instruments, corporations, and all capital fictions in law are dead instruments of estates of decedents. Your all capital name is an estate trust account, and it is just a KV, and you are deemed dead. So they are in charge of that. See, so you're considered dead beyond the sea, reprobate of spirit. So then there's the personal jurisdiction. So when he joined the military, he agreed to be subject to their personal jurisdiction willfully. And guess what? In their form, they can make up whatever laws they want. They don't follow our law. They're not there to follow our law. They, in fact, rarely follow. They don't even follow their own procedures, which they say that they're supposed to follow, that they print in books and papers. They're violating that. They're not. The judiciary is not following Title IV mandates of the legislature from the federal Congress. What makes you think they're going to follow their own internal codes and procedures within the judiciary? They're not following even the stuff they put forth to the people that they say that they're following. So that's really the inherent fraud in that. So the reason why a young man who joined the military could be found guilty is because he surrendered everything that he was and has no substantial right to Fourth Amendment seizures. He gave it up. So when you explain to people where they're at in the law versus where they think they are, I can easily explain why a guy who protected his life and limb and his personal property under the Fourth Amendment with his Second Amendment rights gets put in prison for life because he's in the military, is because they can do whatever they want with you when you agree to their jurisdiction. They have supreme authority to impose whatever they want upon you. It's an admiralty jurisdiction, not American admiralty. This is British admiralty. This is Babylonian slave trade, slave banking, where slaves were trucked, and that's the British admiralty. The British were forced imperial colonization admiralty, where they just went and stole people, or were the maritime shippers for the Muslims and the Jews that stole the Christians and the blacks from Africa and shipped them around. That's their admiralty. Our admiralty law, American admiralty, is completely different than British admiralty. They're not supposed to be doing what they're doing pursuant to American admiralty. That's the point of we are being governed. We are having a foreign jurisdiction of law, if you can call it that, oppressed upon us, that we're not supposed to be subjected to. That's the coup, that's the fraud. You're being told it's one thing and it's exactly the other, but in admiralty law, which is when you're like on a ship.
I just received a link. Let's see, stand by. Somebody's asking me to stop.
Okay. Stop what? Explaining admiralty law?
CPS or DCFS, also known as Child Protective Services. And I keep posting these clips on Twitter, and some of you have expressed interest in...
Okay. There's some things in regard to the Los Angeles Child Protective Services. I've been exposing them for quite some time on Facebook, and this isn't a new...
That's what I am uploading today.
No.
As we all know, there's a systemic problem with the Department of Children and Family Services, or CPS, where they are unjustly taking children away from families and falsifying reports to keep those children away from their biological parents.
Okay, this is a topic that I've been wanting to broach, and that is the fraud on the court. And the original mission statement of the Porthole to Justice was to expose. Okay.
Can you turn that audio off real quick?
The original purpose of the Porthole to Justice was to expose the fraud on the court. And to use some of these testimonies as evidence that yes, they are trafficking children. Yes, they are frauding Title IV. And when they don't have enough evidence to substantiate a case to qualify for the federal funding, they will insert other case numbers to do so. And I have seen
or fabricate it, or
fabricate lies and circumstances to do so, and keep these children. And they intentionally target children that have are middle class or struggling parents, but they know will fight for their children. The children that are really, really abused are being left in those circumstances and in poverty because they know these parents have no money and they don't care, and they're strung out on drugs. And oftentimes what we see is, or
they do care, and that's why they're strung out on drugs.
The system isn't designed in a way. It's kind of like the police department, which has a quota they have to meet for speeding tickets. It's the same thing for parents. And even Dr. Phil has said publicly on his show, his TV show, I would rather investigate 1,000 innocent parents for 3 years in the courts and generate money for the courts rather than miss that one abused child. Well, in reality, they're missing all of the real abused
1,000 children. Right, but you've abused 1,000 children for the sake of preventing the abuse of one. That's not how our law works. We don't have pre-crime in our country.
Well,
this
CPS
is not a pre-crime construct.
Actually, Congress and CPS is trying to,
Oh, I understand that. Well, yeah, because we're already declared heretical. We're under this position of presumption that we're already criminal in everything we do because we refuse to accept the Pope as the vicar of Christ. So we're already declared, kind of criminal in their reprobate, cultish, religious mindset. The fact that we won't bow down to their cult hierarchy of monarchical law, ecclesiastic, and Roman civil law, we're declared reprobate of spirit of mind and criminal in our nature. So that, the fact that I won't let a man who wears a white dress, whose instruments of religion have a history of war, rape, and mayhem, and pedophilia, and baby trafficking, and slave trade, the fact that I won't let that man be the vicar of my Jubilee, so my God, that's in their mind, that makes me a criminal and reprobate. Well, that makes me righteous from where I come from, because I'm taught that you only serve one master, and no false Elohim and judge of men is going to be that. So you have to understand the mindset that these people come from. You're already deemed damned by these people. And they actually think, well, we're going to save these children from these damned people who won't listen to our spiritual perceptions that constantly war upon the woman and child as red dragons and are spoken of in Revelation. So you have to come from that mindset. So, again,
I think it's so funny.
It's all about perspective.
It's so funny, I moved to Texas and when I'm just going to be honest. I'm just going to be totally frank. When I lived in LA, I hid myself. I isolated. I didn't date because of it's like a prevailing mentality, and I didn't want to engage. I just didn't.
Right.
And I felt like
you're already targeted. Your child had already been stolen.
I was targeted big time.
So,
big time.
And the point of it, look, this is because let's go back to the CPS and the frauds and stuff. Everything about what is happening are frauds. The birth certificate is this fraudulent instrument. The mother did not authorize its creation. It was not told to you what it was doing. It was not told to you what it was engaging your child in. These are instruments that are fraudulent, that in their creation is a constructive fraud. Okay, well, the people, it's too big to fail. Well, that's fine. We can continue with this process, but the people in charge of them don't get to do it anymore. Mm-hmm. So you have a substantial constructive fraud.
The thing is, I don't think people really understand what the targeting is about. They really don't. Because
the targeting is about literally.
Wait, I want to make a point. And please forgive me. The targeting is about engaging you in their system, in trafficking human beings in the courts.
But
and
you have to do it willfully.
If you're not engaged,
you have to do it willfully. You have to do it willfully, and this is what I'm trying to tell you. Mm-hmm. People don't understand
that there are certain things they are doing that are giving their consent to these people by not speaking. It's a thing called tacit procuration. Silence is consent. When you're not a belligerent to oppressions of your substantial rights. Okay, first off, your substantial rights are always there. No man or woman or statesman can take them away because God gave them to you. However, if you let people oppress you and tyrannize you and take them from you, well, then that's on you. You know, it's your job to defend what's rightfully yours by your incarnation into this realm as gifts of God, and that's your job. If you're not willing to defend those oppressions, you've got an issue there, and that's that in itself. So when you willfully are not, the one thing in law that is a fact of law, a maxim, is only belligerents preserve their rights. Only belligerents preserve rights. So if you walk into these forums of foreign jurisdiction esquires and your attorney says shut up and don't talk, and you shut up and you don't talk, you just gave your rights away. So people understand that it's not even an issue of saying I don't surrender my rights. When you say nothing, when you know that you're being warred upon and they've stolen your children and they've murdered your family, or they've done this or that, or they've shot your friend on the street for a blinking lack of a bulb and a tail light traveling freely. You know, when people are not being belligerent, I don't mean pick up arms. I mean, just be belligerent and say we're not going to tolerate it anymore, okay? With prudence. Remember, prudence means with reason and logic. So if we as a republic people, in a republic, allow demagoguery of democracy to prevail where the private army of a private jurisdictional form of law, foreign law, is oppressed upon you, and you're not belligerent even in logic and reason in these circumstances, it's your fault if you have your rights denied. That's on you under the laws, the eyes of common law even. Only belligerents preserve their rights, and silence is consent. Those are two maxims of law that you must know. Okay, so when I went into these forums, I was not quiet. I was belligerent. I was not silent. And as such, even though they put me a year in prison, and of which 3 months I spent in the hole, I walked out of there with all my rights intact, victimized by their frauds, which is in itself a claim, which I established the day they brought it to me. That doesn't mean that I'm going to, and so then you look for remedy and relief, because that's the issue here. You can only say I'm going to go to a gun and I'm going to overthrow my government when after you've exhausted all prudence. That's in our Declaration of Independence. Prudence dictates when states and men are set aside. Logic and reason.
My guest says she was, she said that she moved to Dallas a couple of years and thought it would be a great place to live and her life, and she called a good pastor who she thought was a good pastor, and he said, "You will lose your son if you don't get out of here."
Right. Good for him. He was being honest. So we go back to that. What people don't understand is that what Title IV basically has done is allowed the private army of the judiciary to walk your children.
Let me finish this. This is very important. So let's say the pastor is being honest. If we speak up and assert our rights, and
you preserve them. That doesn't mean you're not going to continue to be warred upon, because where is the enforcement of the law if all the people remain silent and give their rights away? This is a simple argument of when you let the devil in the door, okay? You let the devil in the door. If you're not going to keep the devil out of your house, and this is in the Bible too, you cannot shackle a strong man lest to come into his home and shackle him in his home. Mm-hmm. So when you let the devil in the door by not being belligerent and going, that's a crime, because all we can do is witness. Again, where's the enforcement? So for me, I have all these torts against me. I have been denied remedy and relief, as has my son, my godson, my wife's son. He's been denied remedy and relief. My wife's been denied remedy and relief. Her daughter has been denied remedy and relief. When you're denied remedy and relief, that's when you take them to equity and you take them to the law, and that's when prudence has been shown to be exercised. These people, and this is an example of why these forums that say, we're a new common law grand jury. Well, no, you're not, because in order for you to cast aside the chains of a despotism, you have to have exercised prudence and shown that there is no other way for you to get remedy and relief but to completely cast that government aside. You know why you don't have the right to do that? Because other people live there too. And you're casting stuff aside before you've proven tyranny and despotism that prudence cannot correct. You don't have the right to bring all the innocent women and children and men into your issues when you failed to exercise your rights properly by not being silent, by showing belligerence, and affecting prudence in the only forms of justice where you're told that you're supposed to be able to seek remedy and relief. And the Judicial Act of 1789 tells you when it flips on a dime, literally.
Another thing I want to touch on really quick, because this has been a really intense, poignant show, and really cuts to the heart of the matter on a lot of issues. I want to touch on not waiving your rights in the court of law and getting it on the record, and the difference between there's one more thing, 2 points, and the difference between your higher power and giving your rights over to the courts. Can you kind of expand on that? Well,
the first thing I would say is there's always the one thing that everyone has the right to do is challenge the jurisdiction of the people that bring you there, and you do that by saying the word demur. Demur is a pleading all to itself. You need to say nothing else. And every time these reprobates speak in their magi civil forms, you say, I object. I don't care if they say your name is, you go, I object. I object, I object, I object, I object. You say nothing. When they say, do you understand? No, I don't.
When you say I object, it becomes an appealable issue.
You preserve a right at that point. Anything they say to you, and like I said, these people are trained in the art of deception and lies and atonement, and they're magi, they're magicians of their form of law, quote unquote, and they get you to surrender rights, and you don't even know you've surrendered them. It's a trick. It's a fraud. It's all fictions. It's a simulation of process merely to steal from you and to defraud you of your estates. I can explain the whole processes of the courts and how your executorship is stolen by parole evidence, and then it's given to the trustee to reassign to the plaintiff, who's also a bar union member. So your bar union member, and even bar union members don't know this is going on, but that's the law that's underlying it. It's been obfuscated. So people don't understand. These people are not your government unless you willfully make them. That is the principle of our government. We are a jural society who are governed by the consent of the willful. When your government starts sticking guns in your face and violate, first off, any law, a statute, or declaration of a judiciary, or anybody who purports to be an officer or agent operating under color law, who does anything or says anything to you or orders you to do anything that is repugnant to the Constitution, that is void in the law. It's not voidable. It's just not. It doesn't exist. It's not a lawful act. And so, like this district court in whatever district who says the military grade guns are not covered under the Second Amendment, he's an idiot and he doesn't know the Second Amendment, because that's exactly what they're for, is to protect you against despotism. So if by our construct, if the military owns it, by law the people are allowed to have it. We're supposed to have equal firepower to our state. So we're supposed to have tanks. We're supposed to have ballistic missiles. We're supposed to have nuclear warheads at the disposal of the people.
Okay, let's talk about this then. Define the Second Amendment right, because I think people have this perception that the Second Amendment right is the freedom to bear arms, and that's not at all what's it about. It's about
it's the freedom to bear arms for the purposes of creating a means of defense against tyranny and despotism from a state.
Because
period. That's what it's for.
They knew that our form of government could become
because that was the way we achieved because we'd already had to go through it to achieve some sense of autonomy from the despotism and tyranny that already existed.
Uh-huh.
That's the only way to do it. when you're dealing with people who oppress the oxymoron of the law of power upon you, which is, I have the biggest gun, I have the biggest army, so you're my vassal, you're my slave, you're my peon. When you have that mindset running your world, you have to have equal measure to balance that out. So our Constitution afforded to the rights of the people at large, the fourth branch of our government, which is really, they're the fourth branch, but they're the people that created all the other three branches by their grants of law in their jural unanimity to give other people, states of men, as proxies of their substantial rights, the right to call them their governance and to provide for their public safety and security as proxies, as your servants, to protect your interests, not to tyrannize you through despotism. What has happened is those instruments of government have been cooed by foreign interests and bankers and are lying to you and defrauding you, and have instead put your children up to pay your debts. They're not even our debts. They're their debts. They're horrible at managing our estates. They're not only horrible at it, they've willfully been horrible at it for the purposes of stealing and defrauding us and saying we're bankrupt when we're not. You guess who's filed for the bankruptcies? The Esquires, who raided our trust. We're not the ones that are bad at management of our estates. The trustees put there in charge of. So the trustees have willfully defrauded us for the purposes of every time they file a bankruptcy, we have to put another marker on the argument. Well, the last time they did the marker, they put our kids' flesh as tradable commodities to pay for their debts. Mm-hmm. Their debts as trustees. They're not our government. So they conspired with the prevailing bankers and the unseen hands of reprobates who think that they own everything that you and I see, to put our children up for payments of fictitious debts that were created in fraud. So your children are, with Title V, the way it is directed, Title V has allowed the corrupt states, corporate states of men in coup, run by bar union members and unlawful monopolies, to walk your children into bankruptcy proceedings where they are seized in auxiliary maritime liens, in admiralty suits, not common law suits, not suits in equity, foreign jurisdiction, piracy, military commerce law, to be traded as debt commodities. Mm-hmm. Your children are being sold to pay off the debts of their trusteeship. Now, there's a divine nature to that, to expose the repugnant things that we've always known as existed, where we can finally, now that we have the UCC and we have the NSA and we have everything on computers and everything has a key code in the U.S., we can now track exactly who those reprobate masters are in the banking, with the banking laws and the transaction codes and the Social Security claims. We can actually track where the reprobates that have oppressed men and women and our families and made war upon the woman and child for thousands of years, we know who they are now. We can find them. We can point to them. We can watch the way they've done their banking. See, we made them put their reprobate banking on the record, and we can track them now. We've never been able to do that before. That's the divine providence of even letting this disgusting reprobate behavior to continue, for the purposes of being able to sting them and to pluck out that which is offensive in the divine instrument. We just need to pluck them out. Mm-hmm. We know who they are now. Pluck them out.
Yeah.
But people don't understand. Whenever you don't understand what your law is versus what they tell you it is, Title IV is walking.
I think we're at that. I think we're at this moment in time, and the people can no longer sustain the corruption. They can't. How many
children are disappeared every day in this country?
Yeah.
Are just stolen, disappeared. I mean, people don't understand that there is a Holocaust. When this is all told, I promise you, the numbers of children that probably have been disappeared by these reprobates out of our hands, that we won't know where they went, are going to be in the millions. I mean, this is going to be worse than the Nazi Germany. The judiciary of the United States and the corporate states are perpetuating kidnapping and child trafficking, which are treasury crimes. They are violations of Title IV mandates. They are frauds upon the funds of the United States, and that's the issue here. This is rampant fraud. This isn't just human trafficking. This is fraud. This is fraud upon the books. This is international bond fraud. This is fraud in so many ways. That's why, we're going to talk about the OIG, the Office of the Inspector General. The Office of the Inspector General, everyone who has a clear violation of Title IV fund mandate should be filing a formal complaint in writing to the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, because their job is to audit and to look at any claims where they say federal funds have been expended or applied for that should not have been granted or applied for. So basically, where federal funds have been used where they should not have been used, should not have been used, could not have been used, are frauds against the American people and the United States. You have CPS workers, county prosecutors, and county probate judges, and the court systems that are supposed to be reviewing these cases to make sure they're in compliance with Title IV mandates are perpetuating fraud. Commercial bond, they are defrauding the American people. They are effectors of gross fraud. And that is the issue. And the people in charge of, fine, don't go to the courts. It's better at this point in time, since the military is not openly doing anything about it that we know of, but I'm pretty sure there's something going on behind the scenes in consideration of what Trump has done to shut down child trafficking and human trafficking. But the limitations of the paradox of the law is leaving people with really only one place to go, and that is to file complaints with the OIG, the Office of Inspector General, for violations of Title IV. There's the Greater Office of the Inspector General's office, which is the main bit, and there's also OIG.
Lotus and I are working on the language for a template.
Yeah, we are going to work on.
We're going to be posting very specific directions for the people to file with the OIG, and it's going to be posted.
We're just going to offer them a form that will make it easier.
It's going to be posted to the Porthole to Justice.
And we're going to work with people who have done this, who are actually knowledgeable in Social Security fraud investigations to help us with these forms, so that people, and it's not legal advice, it's just a complaint form that will be more directed to who it needs to go to. Because I'm going to tell you, if every person who has had their child unlawfully taken under Title IV mandates filed a complaint right now with the OIG,
and we're
the OIG would have immediately open.
We're so much past trying to go through the legal channels
But that you don't have to. I've proven with my son's case there is no remedy and relief in these courts. They are corrupt to the bone. They are not correcting their course. They have no choice. I don't know if they can't. They're afraid. They're going to die. I mean, and that's a possibility. When you're dealing with international child trafficking rings that have existed for thousands of years, folks, people are threatened every day that want to do the right thing. And I'm not saying that that's right, that they should surrender that, because I would tell you, a patriot's supposed to do whatever they're supposed to do to defend innocence, even if it means die. I'm sorry. That's their obligation under the greater law of God. You're not supposed to allow states of men to do things to innocent children that are repugnant and disgusting. And if you have to die to protect the lives of innocents, you're supposed to. That's what righteous people do. So that's not even an excuse in my mind. Well, my family was threatened. Well, I'm sorry to hear that. How many families have you threatened? How many people have you cast to the lions for your own personal lucre and gain and self-interest? That's repugnant too. That's reprobate. Too bad. Bite the bullet. You're going to say you're the lawmakers? Well, affect the law and bite the bullet and do your job instead of trafficking our babies. Because kidnapping is a treasury crime. So is the perpetuating of kidnapping. Any court, quote unquote, under Title IV probate mandates that are not following Title IV probate mandates are affecting fraud. And if they're not following the mandates when they see children, that's effectively kidnapping, which means that if you're not following Title IV, if you're seizing children without a warrant that are not in emergency harm's way, the house is on fire, whatever, but if they're sitting nice and cushy in a house and you go seize them under temporary emergency orders with no warrant, that's a crime. That's against the title. Okay, if you have a grandmother who is there and or whatever, that especially pre-qualified or whatever, when the child was seized, and you didn't give the kid to that family member immediately instead of taking them to a foster care program and applying for federal funds, instead of giving them to the family member you're supposed to give them to under the statutory mandates, that's a fraud of Title IV. That is a crime. That is a treasury crime, because you are applying for Title IV funding, which is a fraud against the United States, and you've affected kidnapping, which is a treasury crime. And the courts who are not correcting these crimes against these families and these children and mothers and fathers and the states and the American people and the United States proper, guess what? The perpetuating of kidnapping is the same degree of felony as the kidnapping itself. So all these, quote, judges that aren't correcting these improper seizures, they're affecting kidnapping too, because they're perpetuating it. And that's really the issue here. That is the simplest way I can put it. These are frauds. Everyone who feels that they have been wronged by a Title IV action against their family needs to file a complaint with the Office of Inspector General and demand a hearing on the matter. I would say that if we had this up and running, 10,000 people in 2 weeks through OIG complaints demanding an audit of their state's Title IV program, I would say that the OIG would be mandated immediately to stop all Title IV programming funds until a national audit of every state was had. But I'm going to tell you, if we had a national audit of every state and every county in those states, I believe that probably 60 to 80% of the judiciary would be in jail. That is what I'm going to predict. Because if they haven't affected the kidnapping proper, they've perpetuated the kidnapping. And that's not even talking about the CPS workers and the prosecuting attorneys and all the foster care program people. I mean, I'm not even talking about the peripheral people associated with these Title IV repugnant crimes. I'm talking about the judiciary proper. I have 7 courts with 7 seals, folks, that have repugnantly proven themselves to be in violation of our Constitution and openly affecting kidnapping by perpetuating it on the record. I've got 7 seals broke, folks. 7 seals of 7 courts. That is what is going on here. These people, I don't care what their reasoning is, there is nothing in my mind that an adult can say to me that justifies their failure to protect innocent children of God. There is not an excuse that is allowed in the law for that, for the failure to protect the innocents. Because as I told you, the one and only definition I have ever found in all my reading of what law is, other than Aristotle saying it's what men choose to affect to make life better. Okay, but that was kind of just this over thing. But the only time I found the definition, it says law is the shield. Law is the shield to protect the infant and the insane, and I add the infirmed, the perpetually ill. Law is supposed to shield innocent children from oppressions and despotism and tyranny, not rape them with it, not kidnap them under it. Law is supposed to be the shield for the least fortunate, for those people who can't be belligerent themselves, can't stand up and say demure. A child can't say demure. A child can't object. They are abusing the most innocent classes of people with their reprobate, repugnant behavior in these, quote, courts of law. They're not protecting innocence. If you harm 1,000 children to protect one in future in presumption, you've affected 1,000 crimes against innocent children. These are antithetical. These are void, repugnant arguments to say we're gonna harm the innocence of children. Yeah, it's not. This is. It's about whether the state can own your child versus you can.
It's like I laugh because I don't want to cry. It's.
Well, but it's a simple issue of fraud in this respect. Fine, you're not going to fix it through the courts. I think I've proven that at least the courts I've been to have no desire to correct their errant course of law. Mm-hmm. All they want to do is hide it, obfuscate it, perpetuate the fraud because, well, personally they're afraid of it because they don't understand the natural course of things and the curing of law, and they're afraid the whole world's gonna be up on arms and everything's going to crash and burn. No, just your construct. Just your reprobate behavior. The instruments of state, the courts, the systems itself, the laws themselves, there's very few laws that are not in compliance in these causes of actions. Very few, excuse me. But the men and women, the reprobates in those seats are the ones that are affecting just open sedition and treason in a lot of circumstances. Whenever you war against the laws of the United States, whenever you attempt to undermine the affecting or of the laws of the United, meaning making sure that those laws are not in effect. So when a judge doesn't comply with the laws of the United States, he's warring against the United States, and that's treason. When a judge of the United States or the states thereof affect jurisdiction in a cause of action where they admit they don't have subject matter jurisdiction, and then go ahead and try to dismiss the case and or dismiss and grant immunity, or to lambaste the people bringing the cause of action, saying, if you don't be quiet in your belligerence, we're going to fine you, and basically tyrannizing the victims of crimes. When judges do those acts, that's called treason, folks.
We have a commentator. We have a commentator, and he says the courts are not sovereign and have a boss over them too. That's the protection that the people must seek.
Absolutely, but that courts over them, that's where the central coup is, and that's the whole point. If you're going to seize a child and contrive to plan to make every poor person go all the way to the Supreme Court to get their kid back, or to effect criminal actions against the people oppressing or making war against the laws of the United States under Title IV, that's a contrived bar to the law and remedy. You can't make mothers who have been incarcerated and forcibly bankrupted say, if you plead guilty to this crime, we'll let you have your kid back. Or in one case, this one woman just brought me a case where they made her sign over custody of her son in order to keep her daughter. Now, that's completely criminal. When people are affecting these things, you shouldn't have to go all the way to the supreme jurisdiction of bankruptcy, according to the Bankruptcy Act of 1898, under Section 30, the Supreme Court of the United States, which is a statutory Article III court created during the Civil War, folks. It did not exist in its current form until the Civil War. That is in federal statutes. I can show you where it's at. They are not your Supreme Court, little s, little c, as named in the Constitution. They are not them. That is not who they are. That is a overlay, a fiction, a simulation of process to create corporations and instruments in commerce to overlay the de jure instrument created by law. They are not the little s, little c court in the Constitution. They are an all-capital corporation, corporate instrument of the foreign territory, the District of Columbia, located in the 10 by 10 square area.
Define little s corporation.
When I talk about the little s, little c Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, as named in the Constitution, has a little s and a little c, and Congress is supposed to create them when needed. If you read it, the all-capital Supreme Court, big S, big capital S, capital U, capital, that is a corporation. That is not a de jure court. That is an Article III court created by statute.
So everybody had an understanding.
Yeah. It's these are all corporations, folks. These are corporations sitting in seats, kind of like the Pope. Okay, the office of the Pope is a seat of the ecclesiastic law of the Holy Roman Empire. It's the seat. He is the vicar. There have been many popes. The man within that seat is transient. The Pope, the man becomes the Pope. He changes his names. He takes on the title of Pope. When that man dies, the Pope is still there. The seat. That's why it's called the Holy Roman See. Okay, it's the see. The seat of government. The man occupies it. These are corporations that are occupying the seats where men are supposed to sit. And instead of putting de jure instruments of men in them, they have put corporations within those seats, and they think that they're immune from criminal activities and prosecutions by professing to be your lawful government, when they're really just corporatism and fascism overlaid over real instruments of law. They're trying to defraud you.
Yeah, I need to wrap it up. I need to get some food in my stomach. But
I understand you there. I'm going to go have lunch with my wife. But what people need to understand is this.
Tell Ray I said hello.
Yes, she said to tell everybody hi. She listens to stuff. But I want everyone to know that, when we talk, what's the cure here? Where do we go? Start writing complaints to the Office of the Inspector General. Start putting your stuff in writing. We're going to get a form up to try to facilitate that easier. But if everybody who thinks that there are frauds being perpetrated in Title IV and that they're being criminal, that people are acting criminally against them, imposing criminal tyranny and despotism in these probate courts, whoever they are, even if they were de jure, even if these were the lawful courts, folks, they're still affecting fraud. It is a fraud to apply for federal funds when the federal grant does not allow it to be applied for. There are parameters and contractual agreements that these corporate states have agreed to follow, but they're not following them, and the judiciary is not making them follow them because they're in conspiracy to undermine the law of the United States. So this is simple fraud. Start complaining to the OIG and CCing the Department of HHS, Health and Human Services, and your president. Start doing that. And if everybody who's been victimized by these Title IV fraudulent activities did
I really want to engage you and have you back on regarding this.
Yes,
regarding the story with the young Marine who was just sentenced to life in jail. I want to go. But let's do that on another show.
Absolutely. But that has to do with jurisdiction and what he has willfully put himself in the jurisdiction of. In admiralty law, in common law, the judge is just there, the quote-unquote judge, who doesn't have to be an attorney, because the grand jury and the juries elect the judges in that case. The judge is supposed to be the arbiter of the law, who's supposed to go and research and provide for the jury what law they ask for. He's not supposed to tell you the law. He's supposed to be the arbiter of the law when the jury goes to him and asks him to do something. And so, therefore, the jury defines the facts and applies the law as it is presented prior to the case. It isn't made up at that time. Under admiralty law, the judge, who is the captain of the ship, defines law and fact. They can make up law right there on the bench under their type of jurisdiction, and that's what you have. You probably have a young man who is subjected to an admiralty proceeding disguised as a civil action, because there are no criminal codes. All causes are civil right now, or all things. So he was subjected to the admiralty law, which he willfully agreed to be subject to when he joined the military. They didn't tell him that's what was going to happen to him, but that's what happens when you join the military. You surrender to the private military law, and they own your body. They own you. They own everything about you when you join the military. Mm-hmm. And when you choose to work for certain instruments of state, that's just part of the contract. If he probably read the fine print when he signed up, if he'd known what he was reading, they probably disclosed it to him, because they can't lie to him overtly. They have to put it there in disclosure. So people have no idea about personal jurisdiction. They don't understand when they willfully give up their rights. They don't understand any of this stuff, and that's the unfortunate part, because that's how they are stealing our kids and kidnapping and trafficking men and women in prison industrial complex, which is just peonage and slave labor. I mean, we could go over this, but this guy is basically, he is an example of them disclosing you without telling you the law what they have the power to do when you agree to be one of their peons and one of their slaves by joining the military. That's a fact of, anyone, if the military wants to come argue with me and tell me they don't own your flesh when you sign up, I'll be like, really? Okay. They do. You're agreeing to give them your flesh. So, he's learned the hard way what he willfully agreed to do and to surrender to, but wasn't enlightened enough to realize he'd done when he signed up. And that's the unfortunate part of this paradox. And again, when you let the devil in, it's real hard to get him out of your house. And that's why people need to understand what the law really is, so we stop letting the devil in and stop giving up our rights unknowingly. So we can talk at any time. We talk all the time. I have no problem. But that, from my mindset, I know exactly why he's where he's at. He agreed to be one of their peons and slaves, and they did with them what they felt they wanted to do. And they're trying to tell every military man, don't you dare shoot our reprobate criminals that we want to run. That's not your job. You're supposed to let our private army of the judiciary protect you. So it's a case law where they're trying to basically establish that men in the military don't have the right to defend their own family. How's that make you feel?
Well, I don't blame them for feeling threatened about these gun laws, and sometimes when you come back from war, that's all you have, right? Well,
I can tell you again, I want to really reiterate, anything that is repugnant to the Constitution is void. Marbury versus Madison. So this district court judge telling you that, again, if the government possesses them and can use them against you to oppress tyranny and despotism, which we see them do every day when a SWAT team shows up, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever the cops are carrying and your National Guard are carrying and your SWAT teams are carrying, you're supposed to, by law, have the right to the access to that for equal measure. Because if the people are not given the equal means of protection that the government that they purport to be given the grant to be governed, government, then that instrument of government can turn itself upon the people and oppress tyranny and despotism. That is the point of the Second Amendment, is to prevent such despotism and tyranny from states of men from being oppressed upon us, even by our own government. So whoever that judge is doesn't understand the basic concept, but then he's like the second one. What is that retired one coming? We need to get rid of the whole Second Amendment. These are open statements of coup. These are open statements of coup, and they're open statements of sedition. And people need to start.
I encourage all of my listeners to call the White House regarding.
Absolutely, that judge needs removed. And if there was any good bar union members in that district, they would have argued against it.
The article is posted in the Social Media News Network, and below in the comments is the number to the White House, and he's serving life in prison.
Well, probably somewhere in his agreement, he's agreed to give up his right to bear arms, and so he violated. Whenever you surrender, whenever you become an agent under the color of law, you surrender your substantial rights. Mm-hmm. You operate then only under privileges and immunities, and privileges and immunities can be revoked by the state. And they probably revoked his privilege to the Fourth Amendment and to the Second Amendment. He's only supposed to operate the trigger of that gun, of any gun, under the direct order of his government. And they didn't order him to shoot the invaders into this home, so he violated the law, and he went to prison for it. This is their mindset. And it makes no sense to you and I because of most people go, well, this doesn't make any sense. Well, I'm going to tell you, people, if it doesn't make sense to you, it's because you're unlearned in the law and you don't know what is. What you think isn't. The front is the back is the front. The ledger is reversed. What's positive is negative is positive. It's all messed up. It's all a paradox, and it's not at all what you all think it is. And until you start seeing it for what it is, none of this stuff will make sense. Once you see what it really is, and you accept what it is in law, it all makes sense. It all makes sense.
Oh my gosh, my friend just said the most amazing statement, and I want to close the show with the statement, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, listen. To be at peace does not mean in a place where there's no noise or trouble. That's nonsense because, obviously the world. There will always be noise and trouble everywhere, but peace is knowing what words to say. And with that being said, Lotus, you're awesome.
Namaste.
Namaste. Well, I say namaste.
Namaste.
I don't say that. God bless.
Same thing.
I love
Peace be with you and all your relations. May we all have enough.
What does Spock say? What does he say with his?
I'm quoting. I'm quoting the natives, and the peace be with you.
Yeah.
And all your relations is a native mantra.
And let's shun fear. Let's shun it.
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Well, listen, I've got to get. But it's been fun.
Thank you for the combo and the lunch and the coffee talk.
Oh, of course. Always.
Oh, and by the way, I found someone from a foreign country like New Zealand found my speech And I now have the speech that I did, that hearing is back on. I have the link. I'm going to load it up onto my Lotus Justice page under like 7 of the playlists. So you guys should be, if you follow me, you should be able to get to it. I'd suggest going and getting it and ripping it off the internet for educational purposes, because it's already been subjected to censorship. It's a very enlightening and clear expose of the coup. I suggest everyone go read it or go listen to it. And so I just want to say that it's back on for now.
Cool.
But I love you all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Where can everybody find your page really quick?
You can search me under YouTube or the internet. Just search Lotus Justice. My page is Madly Arts. And you can go on that. It's a YouTube channel. It has all my speeches and stuff, all the presentations I have about the law. But this one will be the newest one. It's under Pedophagy Paradox. It's under Lunch with Lotus. So go listen to it. It's a speech I gave at Nancy Schaefer's memorial. And it's been censored already. It's been removed in at least 2 situations when it's been put up. I'm putting it on my YouTube channel. It's been found on another YouTube link, so we're going to see how long it stays up, but I highly suggest that people go listen to it.
All right, everybody, you heard it here. Tune in. This has been another episode of The Porthole to Justice Off the Cuff with your host, Amelia Duran, and my guest, Lotus Justice. You can subscribe to our show on Spreaker.com. It's absolutely free, guys. And it's been fun while it lasted.
Right.
All right, guys. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.
Yep.
Hey, Brenda Clifford. Thanks for joining the live chat. I love you guys. Mwah. You guys are the best, and you keep me going. I'm on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Have a great day, everyone. God bless.